The unmasking detective Ryan Calloway stood tall in his crisp uniform, his broad shoulders squared with the arrogance of a man who believed he owned every room he entered. He had been with the department for over 15 years, climbing the ranks, building a reputation for being tough, relentless, and, though never officially recorded, brutally biased. His colleagues whispered about his tendencies, but no one dared to confront him. The thin blue line protected its own. Today, he was in court, called in as a witness for a case involving a young black man he had arrested. The suspect, Marcus Lewis, had been charged with resisting arrest, though those who had seen the footage knew that resisting was a generous word for what had happened. The truth was, Calloway had slammed the boy to the ground for asking why he was being stopped. Ryan sat at the witness stand, his jaw clenched as he eyed the defense attorney, a sharp, composed black woman in her late 40s. He didn't know her, but something about the way she carried herself set him on edge. The judge called for a short recess. As Calloway made his way out of the courtroom, a black woman in a tailored navy blue suit brushed past him. She carried an air of quiet authority, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. He barely spared her a glance until she accidentally stepped too close to him. "Watch it," he snapped, his voice dripping with disdain. The woman turned, startled. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Calloway said, stepping closer, his tall frame looming over her. "This is a courthouse, not some street corner." A hush fell over the nearby officers and attorneys as they turned toward the unfolding scene. The woman's expression didn't waver. She simply stared at him, her dark brown eyes searching his face for something. Recognition? Maybe. "I don't believe we've met," she said coolly. "I don't meet your kind unless I'm putting them in cuffs," Calloway muttered under his breath. The silence in the room became suffocating. A few officers stiffened, exchanging nervous glances. Calloway, oblivious, scoffed and turned to walk away. Then, a voice boomed from the doorway. "Detective Calloway." He turned, irritated, only to freeze as he recognized Captain Reed, his superior officer. Next to him stood the mayor, and between them, the woman he had just insulted. "Detective," the captain said, his face pale. "Meet your new boss, Chief Danielle Carter." The weight of those words hit him like a sledgehammer to the chest. "Chief Carter." His mouth went dry. She held out a hand, her eyes locked on his, a knowing smile playing at her lips. "You were saying," she asked. The color drained from Calloway's face. He had just insulted, threatened, and belittled the highest-ranking officer in the department. His new boss. And judging by the looks on his colleagues' faces, they knew it too. The courtroom doors swung open, and the judge called everyone back inside. But Calloway's world had just been turned upside down. Because in that moment, he knew his time in power was over. A cold sweat trickled down Detective Calloway's back as Chief Danielle Carter's outstretched hand hovered between them. His fingers twitched at his sides, but he didn't move to shake hers. He could feel the eyes of the entire room on him, officers, attorneys, clerks, and even the judge's assistant, who had paused to watch the scene unfold. Chief Carter let the silence stretch, her smile unwavering. She finally withdrew her hand, tilting her head ever so slightly, as if studying him like an insect under glass. "Well," she said smoothly, "I suppose we'll be having a conversation later." Calloway's jaw clenched. He wanted to snap back, but he knew any wrong move now could end his career. The mayor and Captain Reed stood behind her like silent executioners, their expressions unreadable. "I apologize for the misunderstanding, Chief," he finally forced out. Chief Carter raised an eyebrow. Misunderstanding? Interesting choice of words. Without another glance, she turned and walked into the courtroom, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. Calloway barely breathed as he watched her go. This couldn't be happening. He had been in this department for over 15 years, and now he had just openly insulted the first black female police chief in city history. Worse, he had done it in front of half the courthouse. A reckoning in the briefing room by the time the court proceedings had ended. Calloway knew his day wasn't over. Sure enough, as soon as he stepped out of the courtroom, Captain Reed was waiting. "Chief Carter wants to see you in her office," Reed said, his voice tight. Calloway exhaled through his nose and followed, forcing himself to walk with his usual confidence. He told himself she wouldn't fire him. She couldn't. He had seniority. The union would back him. He had friends in high places. But as soon as he stepped into Chief Carter's new office, those assurances wavered. She sat behind the desk, her uniform crisp, her hands folded in front of her. The walls were still bare. She hadn't been in the position long enough to put up awards or photographs. But even without decorations, her presence filled the room. "Detective," she greeted, gesturing for him to sit. He hesitated but obeyed. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she studied him, as if assessing whether he was worth her time. When she finally did speak, her voice was calm, too calm. "You know," she said, "I did my homework before I took this job. I made a list of officers with the most complaints filed against them. Guess whose name kept showing up?" Calloway's hands clenched in his lap. "You have 17 excessive force complaints," she continued, flipping through a file. 9 of them from black civilians. 3 from fellow officers. And yet, here you are. No suspensions, no consequences. The system protected you." He shifted in his chair. "If I'd done anything wrong, I would have been disciplined." She let out a dry laugh. "Disciplined? You and I both know how this department worked before I got here." He didn't respond. "I don't tolerate racism in my department," she said, closing the file and leaning forward. "And I definitely don't tolerate officers who think they're above the law." Calloway exhaled sharply. "With all due respect, Chief, I've done my job for years. The streets aren't safe because people get their feelings hurt." Her eyes darkened. "Funny. I was on those same streets, and I didn't need to brutalize people to do my job." Silence stretched between them. Finally, she sat back. "Here's what's going to happen, Detective. You're being put on administrative leave while we review your conduct. That includes all use of force cases in the last 5 years." His stomach dropped. "You can't." "I can," she interrupted. "And I just did." Calloway shot to his feet. "This is a witch hunt." Carter remained seated, utterly unmoved. "No, Detective. This is justice catching up with you." His chest rose and fell with heavy breaths, his fists clenched. But as he looked into her unwavering gaze, he knew his reign was over, and there was nothing he could do about it. Detective Calloway stormed out of Chief Carter's office, his face red with fury. The hallway outside felt smaller, the walls pressing in on him. He could feel the eyes of his fellow officers watching as he passed, some smug, some curious, but none sympathetic. Word had already spread. By the time he reached the parking lot, he pulled out his phone and called his union rep. "They're putting me on leave," he hissed the moment the call connected. "We need to push back. Chief Carter is trying to run me out." There was a pause on the line. Then, his rep sighed. "Ryan, you need to stand down." Calloway blinked. "What?" "There's nothing we can do. The department's been getting pressure from the community for years. Carter's got the mayor and the DA on her side. If she wants to dig through your history, they're gonna let her." Calloway gritted his teeth. "So what? I'm just supposed to let her ruin my career?" Another sigh. "You already did that yourself." The line went dead. For the first time in his career, Ryan Calloway felt powerless. A new era 2 weeks later, the results of the internal review came in. The investigation uncovered patterns of excessive force, falsified reports, and disturbing evidence of racial bias. The community, long silenced by an indifferent system, finally had its proof. Under public pressure, the department had no choice but to act. Calloway was stripped of his badge. The day he cleaned out his desk, he avoided looking anyone in the eye. The silence in the precinct was deafening. As he carried his box of belongings through the lobby, the elevator doors opened. Chief Carter stepped out. Their eyes met for a brief moment. She didn't smirk. She didn't gloat. She just looked at him, steady and unwavering. And then, just as quickly, she walked past him, toward her office, toward her future, toward the new department she was building. And Calloway? He walked out into the world he had once controlled, now stripped of his power, forced to face the reality he had spent years denying. And for the first time, the badge that had once shielded him could no longer protect him from the truth.